A quiet shift often unfolds the moment Americans settle into Canada, a kind of atmospheric softening that feels almost cinematic in contrast to the pace they are used to. The most striking element appears not in grand cultural symbols, but in the emotional texture of daily life. Streets move slower, conversations stretch longer, and the national mood carries a gentle steadiness that Americans often describe as unexpectedly grounding. The contrast between two neighboring nations becomes immediately visible in the subtle details: public spaces designed for lingering rather than rushing, city sounds muted by long stretches of calm, and people who seem to move with an internal rhythm that rarely accelerates beyond necessity. Early impressions typically center on this quieter social landscape. Many Americans notice the absence of constant tension in public interactions, the lack of raised voices, hurried gestures, or interpersonal friction. Even in large cities, the atmosphere leans toward composed rather than chaotic. There is a sense of social trust woven into ordinary moments: pedestrians crossing without urgency, cyclists gliding through neighborhoods without the expectation of conflict, families walking at dusk without glancing over their shoulders. Sidewalks feel safe, and public transit carries a patience that stands out sharply for newcomers accustomed to environments where efficiency often replaces courtesy. This calm extends into institutional life as well. Americans often remark on how public systems, healthcare offices, government counters, community centers operate with a tone that feels less transactional and more humane. The cultural expectation leans toward fairness and shared responsibility, creating environments where people are treated as members of a collective rather than individual competitors navigating a system alone. The emotional atmosphere becomes an extension of this value, steadier, more measured, and less shaped by pressure. Beneath these first impressions lies a deeper cultural contrast rooted in priorities. Many Americans note that Canada's social rhythm is guided less by ambition and more by balance. Workplaces commonly emphasize boundaries. Late-night emails, aggressive deadlines, and constant competition carry less cultural weight. Outdoor culture, community time, and seasonal rhythms hold a more central place in Canadian life. The expectation is not constant optimization, but steady participation in family, community, and nature. This mindset often leaves newcomers noticing how much emotional space opens when a society is not driven by overstimulation. As the weeks pass, these patterns become clearer. Everyday interactions carry a politeness that is habitual rather than performative. Neighbors greet each other with a quiet warmth. Small disagreements tend to resolve without escalation. Even in stressful situations, there is an unspoken rule to remain composed. Americans often find themselves observing how this politeness is not merely about manners, but about preserving a shared emotional climate in which conflict is minimized for the collective good over time. Americans living in Canada begin to notice how this cultural calm shapes the architecture of everyday life. Residential neighborhoods often feel intentionally designed to support a slower pace: wide tree-lined streets, accessible parks in nearly every community, and public spaces that encourage gathering rather than dispersing. Evening streets are filled with families on strolls, dogs padding through quiet pathways, and the distant sound of children playing in open fields. The physical environment mirrors the emotional one: spacious, gentle, and subtly attuned to collective well-being. One of the strongest cultural differences emerges in the way Canadians relate to nature. For many Americans, the proximity of wilderness feels astonishing. Even in major cities, natural landscapes are never far. Sprawling lakes, forest trails, and quiet rivers shape daily routines. The relationship with outdoor life is not treated as a hobby, but as a foundational part of identity. Weekends revolve around cottage trips, hiking routes, skating trails in winter, and spontaneous escapes into green space. Americans often remark on how deeply this connection reshapes their sense of time, offering a form of grounding that contrasts with the more urban-centric lifestyles many bring from home. Social interactions reveal another layer of difference. Canadians tend to prioritize harmony over dominance, creating a communication style that is softer at the edges. Conversations flow with pauses rather than interruptions, and disagreements tend to unfold gently, with an emphasis on avoiding unnecessary tension. This subtle politeness, sometimes interpreted by Americans as reserved, becomes increasingly appreciated as it consistently creates environments where people feel safe to exist without constant interpersonal vigilance. This is especially noticeable in multicultural cities, where diverse communities coexist under an overarching expectation of respect and coexistence. Public life reflects a shared commitment to fairness. Many Americans notice the way social programs, healthcare, education, public assistance are framed less as political talking points and more as elements of national cohesion. This contributes to a sense that society is structured to support stability rather than competition. The absence of extreme social disparities in many regions becomes one of the most reassuring aspects of Canadian life. Even when challenges arise, the general tone of public discourse remains focused on inclusion rather than division. As months go by, these collective values shape typical American experiences in symbolic ways. Workplace meetings begin precisely on time but rarely carry the pressure of confrontation. Community events draw participation from all ages with an ease that feels almost nostalgic. Public holidays emphasize togetherness and local identity. Even winter, often feared from afar, becomes a ritual of resilience and shared enjoyment. Neighborhoods glowing with warm windows, outdoor rinks drawing families into the cold, and communities coming alive under falling snow. These recurring experiences become cultural anchors. For many Americans, Canada begins to feel defined less by its iconic symbols and more by the understated emotional safety that permeates daily routines. The country offers a sense of predictability, a buffer from intensity, and a social atmosphere where conflict rarely erupts unchecked. Over time, this atmosphere transforms not just how Americans navigate the country, but how they understand their own need for peace and balance. Gradually, what Americans appreciate most about living in Canada begins to shift from the visible differences to the deeper emotional ones. The country's calm pace subtly reorients their internal rhythm. Daily life becomes less about managing external pressures and more about participating in a shared environment where predictability and civility shape the social order. Public spaces feel safe, institutions feel reliable, and relationships develop without the underlying tension of constant urgency. This growing sense of ease often becomes the defining feature of their experience. One of the most profound transformations occurs in how Americans view time. In Canada, time is rarely treated as an adversary to outpace. Instead, it stretches gently across long evenings, quiet mornings, and weekends that feel genuinely restorative. Seasonal changes amplify this feeling. Autumn arrives in slow waves of color. Winter introduces rituals of warmth and togetherness. Spring reawakens communities, and summer turns parks and lakes into vibrant gathering points. These cycles create a rhythm that encourages presence rather than relentless forward motion. Many Americans find that this seasonal cadence reshapes their lifestyle in ways they did not expect. Work-life balance becomes another area of cultural adjustment. Canadian workplaces often uphold boundaries that prevent work from eclipsing personal life. Vacations are respected, evenings are protected, and employees are not expected to compete through overexertion. This approach fosters a sustainable relationship with productivity, allowing individuals to contribute without sacrificing their well-being. Over time, Americans begin to recognize how this cultural norm alters their sense of identity. Productivity becomes a part of life, not a measure of personal worth. As they settle deeper into Canadian society, the contrast between individualism and collectivism becomes increasingly clear. While both cultures value personal freedom, Canada's social mindset leans toward shared responsibility. This creates an emotional landscape where people feel supported, not only by institutions, but by one another. Whether through community events, volunteer networks, or simple acts of everyday consideration, the cultural expectation of kindness becomes a quiet but powerful force shaping social life. Ultimately, what Americans love most is the feeling of collective common atmosphere where life is steady, trust is high, and people move with a sense of mutual respect. Canada's identity is built not on dramatic intensity, but on a carefully tended emotional climate that values stability over spectacle. This environment offers many Americans a renewed understanding of comfort, belonging, and the subtle strength of a society that prioritizes harmony. In the end, the cultural differences reveal a universal insight. Peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of shared intention. And in Canada, that intention is felt in every quiet street, every gentle interaction, and every moment where life unfolds without urgency. For many Americans, this becomes the defining reason the country feels not just livable, but deeply restorative. Make sure to subscribe, and the next videos will be more interesting.